much. Well, we're going to go ahead then and get started. And I'd like to turn the floor over first to Jackson Schafer. Jackson teaches at Essex Street Academy.
Hi, everyone. So I'm a high school English teacher, and I also teach theater. And I have taught theater for 15 years now, which feels unreal. I feel like I was a college kid just yesterday, but that is in fact not true. And I think if you had polled all the teachers at my school and said, who is likely to be the worst at remote teaching, they would have said me. So I was not looking forward to this with relish. My favorite parts of teaching theater are interacting with the kids in person and building personal connections with them. And so this was really overwhelming. Just real quick about who I teach. I teach at a small public high school. It's a Title I high school. I teach 9th through 12th graders, and right now I'm teaching a 9th and 10th grade theater class, and it's intro to theater. And it was really intro to acting. So that was a huge shift I had to make in my mind, which was how did I go from teaching acting to now how do I teach sort of theater? And in the fall, we do a theater history class, which is like theater history and acting. And now in the spring, this was modern theater and acting. So I had a couple of constraints. One of them was we did not start with synchronous learning because a number of my students did not have access to technology and access to being at the same space at the same time. Also, there's a tremendous number of my students who have COVID impacted family members and were not able to log on at a certain time. So I was tasked with creating an assignment that would get them involved and engaged in theater, but maybe we wouldn't be able all to be at the same place at the same time right away. And so what I came up with was a sort of throwing a lot of things at the wall and seeing what stuck. And I just wanted to share what I did. And then more interestingly, I think what some of the kids did with it, which was even more creative than what I had come up with. So if I can, I'm going to try and share my screen and see if that works. So I can just show you a little bit of what I came up with. So hopefully that works and you can see that. But here was my first assignment. I took a Zoo Story by Edward Albee and I gave them the PDF of it and I said that they could read it. And in it, there was a sort of introduction about the context of the story. And there was a document that each one of them got that was like their weekly assignment. And so you can create that in Google Classroom. Sorry, to back up, I created a Google Classroom for the kids and then created an assignment for each of them and they all got their own individual assignment. And then these were the instructions before they got the assignment that had the models and the instructions in them. But I thought I would share this with you because it's sort of more bigger picture. So they read Zoo Story, and then they could watch it if they wanted to, which some of them did. And then they just wrote a response that was about like, which of the characters did you find more interesting and why, which did you connect to? And then they wrote their own monologue that showed a person slowly showing their the strain. And then in the extra credit option, I said you could film yourself performing the monologue, or you could write a scene about what's going on now. And you could write about the sort of mental strain that people were going through now. And what I wanted to show you was that they kind of combined them, and inspired by Zoo Story, they wrote scenes that were taking place now in this COVID-related time in New York City, and also showed someone slowly showing that they were not so mentally stable. And this first student created this scene where he said two men stand in the elevator, one's wearing a face mask. He pulls out his phone while the other looks vaguely angry, although it's unclear what it's about. The maskless man begins the conversation. And they're standing there and he starts talking about how strange the times are. And then he starts blaming the coronavirus on 5G. And then he goes on to blame it on other things, that it was about trying to stop the election. And it's basically sort of showing, taking Zoo Story and showing how these two awkward strangers' interactions could exist right now. And he did this on his own. He said, I hope this was okay that I changed up the assignment. And then in the sort of amazing way, Alexis, another one of my students, she did her own thing too, where she wrote day 1 of quarantine, day 5 of quarantine, day 16 of quarantine. And she wrote kind of like this journal. And then she filmed herself, and she changed her look at each of the days as how it was going. And she changed the background and got really into it as each of these things go forward. And they were super creative responses to both Zoo's story, but also trying to reckon with what is going on at the moment. And so I thought that was so ingenious that they did that. And I don't know, we were gonna read Zoo's story anyway, and so I felt like maybe, I don't know, talking about mental instability at this moment was not a great idea. Like maybe that would be triggering for people, but in fact, it turned out that I think it allowed them to process some of what was going on and engage with what was going on. And then just the last thing I wanted to say is I was in the middle of directing. I'm gonna stop share now. I was in the middle of directing the Laramie project when this happened, and so the kids are filming themselves doing the like more monologue sectiony parts of Laramie, and then they are gonna send them in, and we're gonna edit them together and create our own sort of like combined sort of like vignettes of Laramie together, which is, I think we got really lucky that that's what we were doing anyway, because that piece lends itself to that. And it won't be a live performance, but it will still be an inspiring thing. But I just wanted to say that in case any of you were experiencing a situation wherein kids cannot all work at the same time, I felt like my goal was no longer necessarily teaching them how to act by having an intention and like, you know, teaching the fundamentals of acting. My goal was now to expose them to theater, to get them to be creative, to get them to be able to like connect to the human experience, and to continue to engage them throughout this time when a lot of them were really struggling. And some of them watched the video, some of them didn't, some of them read the whole play, some of them didn't. I'm not going to say it was universally successful, but I do think that one of the things that I felt good about was allowing them a lot of different ways in. I think was something that I will try and continue to do. So that's sort of my hopefully short spiel, and would be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Do we have any thoughts, any questions for Jackson?
I think that's an amazing project. And it's just an example of how you have an intention to go in one direction and then reality takes you somewhere else. And I think a lot of us are finding that the kids really want a voice to talk about what's going on. So whether it's in the context of theater or art or English or anything, I think that they really need a voice, and we're really serving a much greater purpose than, you know, limited to an academic subject, you know, for the kids.
Thank you. Nan, you have your hand up. You'll need to unmute yourself though. Let's see if we can help you out there.
Okay. That was simply wonderful. I just want to tell you, I wish I'd been with you in that class. I had my kids, because I do Shakespeare workshop, but it also includes restoration, and I hate Hamlet and anything to do with Shakespeare and Hollywood, whatever. And I had my kids write their own sonnets. And one of the kids took it out of The Dark Lady of the Sonnet and wrote it to his poodle, called it 127.5, and it's to his 14-year-old poodle who's dark and black and beautiful. And then some of the kids wrote sonnets, like more creative than I could have been, about the moment and about being teenager and angst and in love, maybe. But those who couldn't write a sonnets like you're happy to get what you can. I said, write haikus then. And one kid who couldn't write a sonnet wrote 3 wonderful haikus, which even some of my middle schoolers did. So.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. And Thomas, do you have a thought or a question?
Just a question, Jackson. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm just curious. I've been hesitant to use the current situation in my class, but hearing that you've done it is inspiring. I'm just wondering if you had a way, maybe through the chat function, where you could just have them reply to you personally, if any of them mention struggling with the
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And actually, what has happened in my advisory and in my other classes is that while I'm talking to them, I say, if anyone wants to reach out to me and chat me privately and let me know. And all of a sudden, my chat blew up with kids saying, my grandfather is struggling, I'm worried about this. And so I actually found that was really helpful. And in fact, some kids started chatting publicly, and that allowed other kids to share publicly, and they felt much more comfortable writing down their situation with COVID than saying it out loud, what their faces were shown or whatever. So yeah, that was actually a sort of profound experience I had with my advisory in my English class. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's turn then the floor over to Joanne Somato, who teaches at Beacon High School.
Hello, everybody. I wrote down a lot because I know I can get distracted. So forgive me if it looks like I'm reading, because I am. This is not teaching. This is triage, is the title of this piece. Is this crisis management? When I was invited to speak to this group, I was first flattered, and then I took a walk and let myself cry. What on earth could I offer all of you when I feel like my whole program and my entire career is literally collapsing out from under me? Then I pulled myself together and remembered that I accepted my first teaching job 3 days before 9/11. And I directed As You Like It at Beacon in the middle of Hurricane Sandy, and we had set it on the Jersey Shore before we even knew there was a storm. The work we do has already gotten us through some really serious detours. Shakespeare wrote King Lear in quarantine. I needed to get out of my own way and remember the long game so I could do the same for my kids. My first priority was to protect my team. I'm a one-woman department. I run a big program, but it's me and a tribe of teaching artists. So the first thing I needed to do was protect the money I had fundraised, ensure that my people were going to be paid through the academic year, so that when I knew they were losing all of their other jobs as the whole theater industry went into freeze mode, that we could still pay them and that they would still be with us in the fall when we came back. So that was really occupying the first couple weeks of quarantines for me. And then my dad got sick, and it was a huge wake-up call. He's okay now, but it was a really terrifying time to help him virtually because he's alone many hours away. But it also woke me up to the reality that what I was trying to expect of my students was just nonsense. Like, it took people in my own family getting very sick for me to recognize that school really needed to not be the priority. No matter what my administration said, no matter what the governor or the mayor said, school could not be my focus. How could I expect it to be the kids' focus? And I'm an elective teacher. Like, I'm keenly aware of the fact that my kids love what we do together, but they don't need my credits to graduate. So if they're struggling to stay above water in remote school, I'm not going to burden them when they have to get those English and history credits so that they get their diploma on time. So the first thing we did while I was really focusing on my dad was just trying to kind of put a bow. Oh, I forgot to start my timer. I'm sorry, Renee. To put a bow on the things that were open and hanging when we went to remote learning. So my big kids submitted monologue auditions that were part of a pre-screen project. Now, can they really use them? Probably not. They didn't film them at school with lights and good sound in front of a green screen. They filmed them in front of a fridge or in a hallway or in a loft bed. And you know what? We celebrate that too. They got it done. The fact that they even tried was a good thing. Okay, like, I just gave them credit for it. And then, you know, one of my best students who has heretofore received A+ in semester after semester of training called me in tears because she lives in a 1.5 bedroom apartment with her 4 siblings and both of her parents. She shares a bedroom with 3 other people, and she is never alone. So she couldn't film at home, and she was hysterical because she thought she was letting me down. And when I told her not to worry about it because it didn't count, and even if I had to give her a grade, she still wouldn't fail the course, and to just let it go. And she was so surprised that I was so accommodating. And I was so surprised that she was surprised. But I think that speaks to how strange these times are. The younger kids, they didn't get to finish their performance unit that we were in the middle of. So I asked them to write a personal narrative for the character they were playing, to unpack the psychology, demonstrate that they knew objective obstacle action. And some of them did it, some of them didn't. But what I learned from that assignment was that they were being asked to write for everything. The hands-on science labs are now papers. The English readings and discussions are now statements. They had to write for gym. So me asking them to write for anything was like punching them in the face. I was like, I can't do this. I can't be the reason that they're feeling more stressed when they're dealing with so much at home. So I kind of started to collect this data. The compromised circumstances at home, the compromised time commitment in front of the computer. And then frankly, I talked to Kate about how our rehearsals were going for the musical projects that we're doing, because we're also trying to produce a virtual little mini version of our play. And I have to consider the fact that kids who at school are so free and they sing so big and they're so brave, at home, they're rarely alone, or they're on the other side of a very thin wall. And yeah, there might be a kid in a big estate in the Hamptons, like singing his heart out on the beach. Yeah, I have one of those. But most of my kids are in the city in tiny apartments with lots and lots of other people. Now let us just imagine for a second that all of our students had all of their siblings and their parents and sometimes their grandparents sitting on every single acting class or rehearsal. Just think about that. That's what it's like for them to try to rehearse and video record something at home right now. So asking them to be that vulnerable in such a public way when something's not done cooking, it's hard to convince them to let it cook, right? This isn't their polished performance that they've rehearsed for 3 months. This is their homework. So when my top honor students were freezing at the assignments to do the tiniest bit of rehearsal, I really flipped the whole thing on its head and said, you know what? Acting is not just getting in front of people, and I can't be forcing them to do beyond what they are capable of right now, and that's just not okay. So I made a visual graphic to explain this because I don't know how to do it otherwise. So I'm going to screen share for a hot second. Does it work? Yes. Can everybody see my nerdy graphic? Cool. I'm a theater generalist, so I'm aware of the fact that even though I'm in a high school and I have a little army of teaching artists, my kids are coming to this craft from many different places. Most come through the lens of acting, but there are kids who come in through the other 4 corners of the work. And I teach my work in complementary fashion. So my actors must learn playwriting, my directors must learn design. And eventually you have to work your way around to all 4, depending on where you begin. Each one is only a doorway. So assuming my Acting 1 kids don't do a lot of playwriting yet, because it's not really in the curriculum until junior year, I might move some of that up. Some of my junior playwright, I see you, Renee, some of my older students who are in the director design frame, they need to go to the quadrant they haven't hit yet. So what I managed to do was to simplify my course streams. I have 2 sections of level 1 and 2 sections of advanced and 1 section of honors into 2 plays, 1 at each level. The younger kids all read the Heidi Chronicles in collaboration with the soundtrack because they thought it was really cool and it was music based and it got them out of reading and writing because it was about the music. And my older kids are about to start a 6-week assessment of Angels in America because I am a little crazy in that reading a play about loving New York in the time of a plague seems like a really good idea right now. And it's something that my students know comes when they get to junior or senior year. They inevitably get to Angels in America. We're just getting to it a little out of order. So from there, I threw away my entire curriculum and created a menu of options in which kids can choose a different part of each quadrant and just kind of shop around and do what they want to do. So if a kid wants to write, then they can. And if a kid wants to draw, then they can. And if a kid wants to make a 3D model of a set, then they can. And if a kid is Muppety and really wants to be acting right now, they can. But it gives them the choice and the empowerment to do what they can with what they have and not feel like they don't have the tools to make a good impression on their friends or on me. And hopefully, with the little ones so far, it's worked so much better. Older ones we'll see next week. Sorry, I totally went over time. If there are questions, let me know. I can't hear you, Renee.
Failed to mute. There we go. I failed to mute myself. Unmute myself. All right. So we already have a hand up. Sheila, you raised your hand very early on. Do you want to jump in?
Okay, can you hear me? I'm sorry, I muted myself.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving me permission and therefore giving my students permission to be vulnerable. Before we left, before all of this happened, we were currently reading The Poet X, and we're halfway through. I made copies of the book before we left, so the kids have the PDF, and this was leading towards their personal narrative. And I feel so fortunate to be a part of this afternoon, because I was thinking of ways in which to allow them to connect to this human experience. I've already had a few students who's lost their parents. One young lady called me, and she was in the emergency room, and her father had just passed. And she was worried about her grade. So when you talked about administration, it's like, yeah, you know, we can't worry about that. We can't be so rough on them to the point that we're just drilling this into them. So I want to build on this experience of personal narratives, right? And I want them to be able and to feel comfortable sharing this and sharing what they're going through, their pain, their uncertainty. I feel fortunate, I teach ninth graders, and I also teach theater as well. So I have both. English, they need me, but the elective, they kind of, it's not really a grade that they need. But I want to use this experience to build on. Tomorrow, ironically enough, the principal's having a meeting with all of us who were running clubs. I also run the drama club as well at my school, High School for Teaching in the Professions in the Bronx. And so I would love to get your take on, I guess, maybe starting with the drama club in terms of how I can build on this personal narrative, how I can build on getting them to share their own experiences with very low stakes, with not feeling like they are being judged or being.
Right. Well, I want to say two things. One, Elizabeth Acevedo, who wrote The Poet X, was my student. So anytime I see her, I literally cry because she's a BDAC kid. She played Ariel in My Tempest in 2006.
Wow.
Woot woot.
Yes.
I can't even. She's magical.
Yes.
So
kids are in love with her. Yes.
Everybody teach all of her books.
Yes.
And let them be movies. She's writing them into screenplays right now.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm gonna let Kate really speak to how to sustain drama club.
Okay.
I really, really want to stress to you,
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to stalk your kids and give yourself permission to genuinely want to know. When I stopped hearing from them, I started aggressively making the decision where 3 to 4 kids a day, if I haven't spoken to them or if they've barely peeped by in class, I'll just text them like it's a normal day and be like, what are you doing today?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden the floodgates open. Like, I'm directing 12th Night the Musical right now, and my Olivia kind of fell off the grid, and she missed a couple of music calls, and I know she's sharing Wi-Fi with sibling, and she doesn't have her own laptop, so she can only dial in from her phone, so maybe she was out of minutes. So like, I knew that things were hard for her. So when I finally texted her and I was like, Deb, what's up? What's going on? I haven't seen you in 3 days. And she was like, I don't know how to tell you this, but both my parents are sick. And it was just her and her sister alone with both of her parents down for the count. And they're okay, but there was a week there where Deb was being the grown-up, Like, I can't rag on her for missing rehearsal when she and her sister are taking turns watching vigil on her sick parents. So I feel like the administration are getting pressure from the city to prove that we're doing something. Right? Like, I just got an email requesting for me to prove how many communications I've had with each family, how many phone calls I've made, how many times I've reached out. And it's physically impossible for me to reach out to every kid who's got a still image on their Zoom call that I know it's not really them. I know they like put up a photo of them working and they're asleep. Like, we physically can't do it. So to me, I'm taking the approach of, if I make it a grab bag and not a mandate, like, hey guys, here's 9 options. Choose 2. You've got 2 weeks to do it. Harass me when you need me. I'm going to check on you if you ignore me. I'm going to do my best to try to catch up with you, but do what you can, not what you must. And if your schools haven't already gone to pass fail, I hope you will help advocate to go to pass fail to take the pressure off. Yes. Because the kids that are manic about their grades, like that poor girl who's gonna graduate anyway, who couldn't film, was so worried about her grade. And I just had to be like, dude, it doesn't matter. Yes. What matters right now is your little sister. Go help her do her homework. You're good. And they just needed permission, right? They needed permission to not put so much pressure on themselves. I feel like if I can do anything to help their social emotional learning, is to be what I always am at school. The empathetic extra mom who's there to say, it's okay to say, no, I can't do that. Period.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you.
So with that,
I can share the project sheets with you guys too, if you need them, if you just want to take them.
That'd be great. Great. With that, we'll turn the floor over to Anna Dolan, who teaches at Bard High School Early College.
Hi, everybody. We have about 600 students. It's a very diverse school. It's a public school in partnership with Bard College. So at the end of 12th grade, they get an AA degree from Bard, hopefully. Anyway, so I wanted to come up with a project that had a lot of complex, imaginative problem solving. I didn't want to go into an academic vein because our students are very overtaxed in that area. I wanted to do something with transformation, so from self to another character, huge transformations. And I wanted to work on something funny to give them some joy. I think that might be, I'm Irish, and I think that we tend to laugh in the midst of tragedy. And the students seem to have taken to that sensibility. So we're making 3 to 5 minute movies that are on their phones, that are spoofs of genres. So cowboy, romance, horror, pirate, in that vein. I wanted them to learn a lot. I wanted them to get absorbed, and I wanted them to do something that was difficult in that way, that was very naughty, and that they really got into it. A respite, an imaginative respite. So first of all, they looked at Cindy Sherman's work and Anna DeVere Smith and Lily Tomlin for images of transformation, for real, so that one person can really be many different things. And how did those particular actors take that on? Then they looked at examples of successful, very short spoofs. So we looked at a lot of Key and Peele because they take on different genres. Some Saturday Night Live. And we settled on making trailers. So instead of making a spoof itself, we made a trailer of an imaginary film about vampires, or, you know, a High School Musical or whatever. Then we looked at film techniques. We looked at Maya Deren, who is a filmmaker from the 1940s, for a list of filmic suggestions, things like meeting character through shadow, speeded up sections, slow motion, stop motion, to just see parts of the body, use of reflection in glass, in mirror, in water, in screens. And then they made a grid, so they plotted out the storyline visually and also through narratively, so that they would have 2 different ways to think about this. And as they did it, I asked them to choose a piece of music to set the tone. Not that they would necessarily use that piece of music in their eventual piece, but that it would help them, it would throw them emotionally into the tone of the piece that they were writing. So they cast themselves and their siblings and their parents, and so they're making these short movies, and then the editing is going to be a movable feast, but you know, it's amazing what young people can do. And then we're going to have a virtual film festival, because our school is really craving situations in which we can be together virtually. So that's it. That's what I've been working on with my students.
I want to just jump in here for a second, because Ani, when you told me about this project a week or so ago, you said something that I thought was so wonderful, which was that you were teaching theater and you couldn't teach theater through a screen, and so you embraced the medium that you were stuck with, and that's how you found your way to this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, whenever you see a film of a play, there's just something so dead about it. And so I wanted to do something that really used, since the screen is what we're stuck with, there's some wonderful things about that. And I think it has to do with the technology, but also you can really pinpoint the perspective. You know, I can talk to you and you can just see my ear. And that might say something to the viewer. Oh my God, that person is really listening. Or I can show you through my shot where the character would be looking right now. So it's a very different medium, but it's all about imaginative problem solving. How do I convey this to the audience in a way that delights me and might delight them, or get the audience to ask all kinds of questions?
Thank you. Jackson, would you like to pose your question?
Yeah, just real quickly, how do they share the videos with you? I just wanted to know the technical question of how do you engage with technology?
Well, they email me the videos, and then I call up the tech person in our school and get them to help me do it. This is going to be something we're going to show the whole school, so you know, that's his responsibility, fortunately. Yeah. But I've just been amazed at how, you know, there's always one or two students in every class that understands how to edit, and then they help each other. I'm really very unhelpful with the technical side, but they seem to always be able to figure it out.
Great. Eva, would you like to jump in?
I've sort of, my question or thoughts that encompass what everyone has been saying, which is this idea of how we're sort of needing to shift and change the way that we share things. And I really hear you, Anne, about like the fact that people are writing so much. And I think it goes to how are we asking young people to share their work and to sort of remove any barriers. And so I came teaching middle school from teaching at the university level, and I basically teach the exact same thing because young people, it's the same thing. They just do different stuff with it. But I'm trying not to like embed barriers within the assignment. So like they are writing. I teach devising, I teach physical theater, and I teach scene study, improv, and I direct the play and the musical. And students take class like 4 times a week during the day, and then we do it. So it's a lot, but things have really shifted. And now it's like, we're doing 6th, 7th, 8th graders all together. They therefore have a 3-year difference in their experience. But so what I'm thinking about is things like the assumptions of, do kids know how to upload a video to share? The idea of our assumptions of that idea of giving choice, right? What are the different ways in, and that they're theater artists, and theater is made from lots of different components. And I think also this idea, Anna, about the film, I teach a class to 8th graders of platform theater, where you have 6 to 8 actors on a 4-foot by 8-foot platform, but you're using cinematic techniques. So you're using split screen, you're using scale, big scale, you know, close up, far away. And so I'm thinking about, well, if we're to videotape it, Zoom something, in some ways in a Zoom thing, we have a proscenium, you have a stage, but then there's a barrier of actually filming it, uploading it. I think, Joanne, your point of privacy is really great. You know, I mean, I think that's real. And I mean, I think what everyone is saying, there's just so many assumptions. I have students who don't have, I mean, I don't know, that we're dealing with a lot of unknowns, and they're slowly becoming known. And sometimes I feel like I'm behind the 8 ball, but I just think like that's kind of what we're dealing with. And I love this idea, Jackson, of taking where we are now and listening to the world around us and putting it into something, whether it's what you're hearing in your kitchen. And the other thing is, like, how do we create collaborative documents? Like, that's what I'm trying to do, where people are hearing lines of dialogue and putting them in one place so that they can take them, because theater is a collaborative art form, and I'm not sure how we're doing that. So anyhow, I just had something to say to what everyone was talking about, and so I just wanted to sort of put it together.
Great, thank you. Well, I'd like to finally then turn the floor over to Kate Quarfordt, who teaches at the New York City Charter School of the Arts.
Hi, everybody. I'm so moved, Joanne and Jackson and Anna. I feel like a bit trembly right now, because it was really, it was just so striking to listen to you, and each of you with your own kind of way in. Each one of you really said things that touched me and that resonated with me. I don't have any like concrete tips and tricks to share. Although I will say in that category that 24-hour plays has a great Instagram feed, and most of our kids are on Instagram. And so if you're stuck for some kind of like just a quick thing to get your kids doing, or just access to lots of little quick pieces that people are making now kind of in real time, that's a really great resource that I just stumbled on. So I wanted to make sure that I said that at the beginning so I didn't get wrapped up and forget. The 24-hour plays on Instagram, great stuff. So I want to just start by saying that at the beginning of this, which now feels like 100,000 years ago, I went through a period of probably a couple of weeks in which it seemed to me like all of my other creative teacher friends were kind of in a flurry of inspiration. The thing that Sam said about the creative constraints seemed to be really lighting people up in very powerful ways. And I was really moved by that. And my experience was completely the opposite. I felt totally overwhelmed. I'm also a mom of 3, and so I was trying to learn how to get my own kids online. Also dealing with just sort of the generalized grief of experiencing what life is like in the city right now. I'm so worried for my own parents, so worried for my own children, so worried about the bigger, broader kind of societal collapse of like worrying about what's happening with incarcerated people right now. Like all of that was sort of like mushrooming. And it was really hard for me to pinpoint into the like, what are we going to do? And in the context of that kind of like swirling kind of emotional state that I was in, I was feeling a lot of pressure to figure out what's going to happen with the musical. I teach at a arts-based middle school that I helped co-found. So I'm really invested in holding together the community, and I feel really blessed and lucky to be able to direct the musical every year, which feels to me like this really galvanizing moment. And I mean, at this time, most every year for the last 20 years, not just at this school, but at the other schools that I've taught at, like this is April, May, like crazy time, covered in paint, head to toe on a ladder, stapling things, and kids all with their little teams, and all the parents on the phone call with the bake sale, and the, you know, rehearsals late at night. Like all of that excitement is so baked into my rhythms as an educator, that I was feeling so at a loss about how to start to translate that. And I want to share my screen for a moment, because I had the, I guess, breakthrough. It didn't really feel like much of a breakthrough, but the moment that I started to really let myself feel what this was, which was really kind of just like an overwhelming feeling of grief, was that I stumbled onto my own hashtag for this little funny thing that I started doing a couple of years ago on Instagram, that during the weeks leading up to the show, every day when I got home from rehearsal, I would empty out my pockets and photograph whatever was in them. And these images, you know, it's just a pile of junk. But for me, when I look at these images, it brings me immediately into the moment of like, oh, yep, there's the trim from Moana's costume. Oh, there's the fake fern from Maui's Island. You know, there's the Band-Aid that I picked up when I didn't have a Band-Aid. I didn't realize I needed a Band-Aid, you know, just like all those little tiny details. And what this drove home to me when I stumbled on it, and which unleashed a very overwhelming and unexpected kind of wave of tears for me, was that the work that we do is so deeply embodied, right? We are, more so than I think any other teacher, a kind of teacher, we are about bodies moving through space to tell a story. The medium of our work is shared breath, is eye contact. And so the experience of trying to translate this into a flat screen, I found so overwhelming and exhausting, because it gives the illusion that we are having that tactile connection, and yet physically our nervous systems know that we're not. And so I found that very, very, it created a great deal of dissonance for me. And when I saw these images and realized that it was that thing that I was missing, that sort of like build up in time and space to this big one moment when we all come together in the dark, and the, you know, the lights come up on the stage and we experience that thing together, that magical thing. And I realized that that was the thing that I was missing. It brought things into focus for me in a little bit of a clearer way. And so the aha of like the what will we do? I'm not saying it's rocket science. It's not. It's like bare bones. But up until that point, when we had talked about the musical, we had talked about like, oh, we'll record a scene, you know, and we'll record a song, and we'll get one kid to videotape themselves and then the other one, and then we'll stitch it together somehow in some app or something. And all of that made sense to me in my head, but it was missing that sense of all of us gathered in the dark. And so the breakthrough moment that I want to share, if for whatever reason it may resonate or be helpful to you, is that we finally decided that instead of doing these little bits and pieces in a piecemeal way, we would do those things, we would collect them, we would gather them up onto a website so that our design kids would each have a tab for costume design sketches, a tab for set design sketches, and then we would have a tab for performance. We would have a tab for, you know, the solos. We would have a tab for the students who want to do dramaturgical essays that would have otherwise gone in our program, or interviews with the cast and crew. And that we will spend the week up until the website is like ready to launch. We'll like pick a date, which we've decided is going to be the 22nd of May, to be our virtual opening night. We won't share the site until then. We'll spend the week before kind of doing the virtual version of all of this stuff in my pockets, which is just kind of like all of the preparations, the getting ready, the like little snapshots or snippets that we can email out to our community to say like, here's what we're building toward. And then on that day, when the site goes live, we can do a little Zoom launch party, so that we can experience that work as kind of a finished product that we're all sharing together. And it doesn't come close to giving us that lived experience, that embodied experience. But once we realized that setting a date and having a little bit of that element of the reveal, it started to kind of put us on this path. It started to kind of galvanize the movement toward making a thing. And it was the first time that I felt like I kind of came alive again. Like I felt a little bit more like I was a body moving through space to tell a story, and less just kind of like a shell of a human who was just kind of stumbling awake every day and saying, oh God, I think I have a Zoom call, what's going on? And we've started to get a bit of traction. I will say for sure that there have been a lot of stumbling blocks, some of them technical, trying to figure out, you know, I mean, obviously we're up against the difficulty of all the things that Joanne mentioned in terms of kids' access to privacy, their access to Wi-Fi, all of that kind of stuff. So we're doing a lot of asynchronous work. You know, it's definitely been a huge learning curve for me. I don't have that technical person that I can just say like, hey, can you help me organize these videos? So I'm, you know, kind of in that awkward moment of being a learner myself, and, you know, figuring out iMovie or Pick, Play, Post, which is a cool app to be piecing videos together on. So yeah, it's been a huge learning curve, but I do think that we're kind of onto something now. And yeah, I can show you just quickly. It's like really not sexy, but for example, here is our Google Classroom for our crew, and we've got our punch list, and we've got our script analysis notes, and kids in a similar way to what Joanne was saying, kids opt into this. This is none of this comes as like a forced thing. So this is the thing that I think I'm probably most excited about, just in terms of like necessity being the mother of invention. I was really thinking a lot about, okay, well, what are our set crew kids gonna do? And then I realized, like, the kids who are gonna be recording scenes, it would be really cool to have a Zoom background, those the ones that the kids can pop in, that is like designed by students to reflect the background. Okay, here we are, like under the bridge in Footloose, or here we are in the church with the light streaming through the stained glass windows. So once we realized that our set crew could actually design backdrops that could be used by our kids in the scenes that they're going to be recording on Zoom, that was kind of a nice aha moment. And the last thing that I'll say is that I have a tendency, which I'm not especially proud of, but that is stubborn as hell, of sort of being a bit of a perfectionist and wanting things to be a certain way. And it's very clear that perfectionism has been a casualty of this whole thing. I can't do this well. Like there's really not a way that I can do this in a way that's going to feel like the vision in my head. And that has been a bit of a painful thing to really have to live with. Like, this is not, as Joanne said, this is not teaching, this is triage. And so it's been really useful, but also difficult and humbling to kind of like have that realization over and over again. And just starting to live into that, it feels like an odd kind of maturation process, but I'm in the thick of it.
Excellent, thank you. So do we have one or two comments or questions for Kate?
Oh, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Well, go ahead, Stephanie, you wanted to ask a question?
So I totally relate to everything that you just said. 30 years of spring musicals, and this time of year, being totally immersed in whatever show it is that you're doing. And so we were supposed to do Matilda, and I had an idea of doing something similar, but the companies that you rent the music from are so stringent about putting any material online, and the contract's like 40 pages long. Yeah, Joanne, you want to? Oh, you're muted.
I have an answer for that.
Okay.
We're producing 12th Night the Musical, and you can't publicize an entire musical number. You can't publicize an entire scene, an entire act, because you need a separate license for that.
Right.
And our loop around is we're actually creating an extended trailer for our show, that we are not going to produce our play in its entirety virtually. We're going to produce it in December. So what we did was we cast the show right before quarantine started, and we cast a couple of seniors that we knew are going to graduate, but instead of casting freshman, sophomore understudies, we cast rising junior understudies that will take over in the fall. And we're going to embed our trailer into the show so that everything they build now is going to be in their play when we finally get to do it for real next year. But if you don't do a whole song, you're not breaking your copyright. You just have to be very careful. You can only use little snippets, thread them together.
Right. So if you want to share with your community, then maybe it's a little bit of 5 songs, like a little.
Right. And as long as it's in-house and you're not like putting it on YouTube and marketing it as an advertisement for your show, you're not breaking the copyright. So our trailer will only be visible within our school arts festival that happens at the end of the year. Our whole arts festival is going online, and that's where it will go. And Kate's so right. Once the kids had a date and they were like, yes, the trailer's going up in the arts festival, then all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, we actually have to do this now.
Yeah. Yeah. Ours was supposed to be this weekend, but so it would be like we'll work towards it for the end of the year, because they already canceled it.
Yeah.
So given the time, here's what I'm going to propose to all of you. Elise has a question, and I'd love for her to be able to pose that. And then I'd like to propose that we take one more question. And that those of you who are able to stay for, say, 10 more minutes, we'll have you go into small breakout groups to talk with a smaller group of your colleagues, and then to come back and share one or two things that you have that you've talked about. And if you're not able to stay, that's fine too, but it would be great. There's so much going on here that I think it would be wonderful if we could have a little bit more time to talk. But Elise, I'm wondering if you'd like to pose your question before we do that.
Sure. I don't know if it's the best, a little bit unrelated, so I don't know if it's the best note to end on, but I just wanted to thank Kate. In addition to everything you were saying about being a director, I was really inspired by those director's pockets photos, and maybe not the original intention, but I've been thinking a lot about how we can kind of like, again, use the medium to make this work, and like use Pinterest and images and things to like, what can be the thing I put on the screen and that's a character. So I wanted to say thank you, because I don't know what it is yet, but I'm imagining like a mini quick thing of like, what's in your character's pockets, or like what is like, put all your like, what is your life right now in like 5 images and take a photo of it. So thank you for that as a bonus addition.
Great. Excellent. So before we send you into small groups, we do want to say happy birthday to Sarah Kuzik, whose birthday is today. And let's take about 10 minutes to go into these small groups, and it would be wonderful. So for those of you who can stay, fantastic. For those of you who do need to go, it has been wonderful having you here. And for those who will go into the small groups, let's have the person whose first name falls at the start of the alphabet to facilitate the group. And we'll give you about 10 minutes, and we'll ask when you come back that you share very briefly, one compelling thing that really pervaded your discussion.
I just want to say one quick thing here is in case anybody leaves before we come back again. For those, a lot of you are new to the Academy for Teachers, and perhaps your schools are new too. And I would ask you if this has been a good thing for you to pay attention to other offerings we have, but also to tell your administrators that this is a good thing, because we'll certainly need the support of your administrators going down the road, and so they need to know their teachers are getting something out of it.
Excellent. I think probably we're pretty much all back by the looks of it here. Let's see, Elisa, since you were in my group, would you like to just very briefly give us one thing the group talked about?
Sure. We talked a lot about kind of using our different tools to make this work for us. 2 of the things that were mentioned were, I know we had talked about Flipgrid as a whole group, but then we also talked about Padlet, which kids can use. Maybe, Vadim, you want to explain more, because I'm not as familiar. Well, do you want to just share a sentence on what Padlet does as a...
Padlet, yeah, it's like a virtual bulletin board. You can post a question, and the students, they need to create their own account, which is free, so that you can see who is typing, who is posting. But basically they just post responses. They can post comments to other students' responses. You can post videos, pictures, Google images. So it can be very creative. It's like a bulletin board with pictures and videos and text, and yeah. I'm gonna try to do it this unit. We're creating a senior video for my seniors. So it's gonna be a place where every week I'll create a new Padlet, and they'll post their responses, and I'll use that in the video.
Great. Would another group like to give us just one brief statement of what you've been talking about? Yes, Lisa.
So in ours, we just talked about sort of our role, sort of taking away from what Joanne was saying, to provide students with an outlet, but in a way that kind of separates them and gives them space to process what's going on, whether that's modifying our classroom routines to include more meditation, or stepping back and relieving some deadlines and expectations, and just providing them a space for connection.
Nice, thank you. Another group leader, would you like to give us, yeah, Anna.
Yes,
Now you're unmuted.
Bob Sloan talked about toy theater. He's doing a scene from Macbeth in which you cast objects in your house and make a tiny set on a table, but that you have a strong directorial vision. And he recommended that we go to St. Anne's Warehouse online and look at their toy theater videos, mainly just to see how they don't have to be super produced, that there's some artistic verve in the almost completed or half done.
Nice. Allison, oh, thank you. Allison, do you want to jump in for your group? Is Allison still here? No. Well, let me call for one of the other two groups. I believe there are two groups.
Jackson has.
Yeah, I can go. Real quickly, we just talked about like different really creative ways of getting around having to shift up everything. And so we talked about closet dramas as being one really cool way of getting kids involved. And then some were doing two-person scenes in breakout rooms. And then some were doing journals and turning those into monologues and thinking about sort of the difference between writing and speech. So it was really about like shifting the way in which we construct curriculum and thinking about creative ways to solve the problem with new options.
Nice. Excellent. Anyone else like to share? All right. Well, with that then, I think we've taken a little bit more of your time than we expected, but the material is so very rich. I'm glad we did. I would like to thank our presenters for such extraordinary material, both ideas and your belief in your students and your desire to really support them. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here.